Amina Carter had always been the type of woman who noticed everything. At 34, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her deep brown skin glowing against the sun's warmth whenever she stepped outside. She wore her natural curls with pride, letting them frame her face, which bore the soft yet determined expression of someone who had learned to navigate the world with both kindness and resilience. Born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, Amina had spent most of her life in the historic city, growing up in a neighborhood rich with culture but not without its struggles. She was the kind of person who believed in doing the right thing, no matter the circumstances. Having worked as a preschool teacher for nearly a decade, she was naturally drawn to children. Their innocence, their boundless curiosity, and the way they saw the world without prejudice. But despite her nurturing spirit, Amina wasn't naive. She knew the world wasn't always kind to people who looked like her. Though she didn't let racism define her, she had experienced enough of it to understand the weight it carried. From being followed in department stores to watching people clutch their purses when she walked by, she knew the subtle and not-so-subtle ways prejudice manifested. Still, she refused to let it harden her. She had been raised by parents who taught her that integrity mattered more than ignorance, and she lived by that philosophy every day. Whether it was helping a lost child in a grocery store, standing up for a struggling student, or offering a kind word to a stranger, Amina believed in kindness. It was a belief that had shaped her life, a belief that would soon be tested in ways she never expected. A typical day for Amina started early. She rose before the sun, stretching in the quiet of her modest two-bedroom apartment before heading to her kitchen to make a cup of green tea. As the tea brewed, she glanced at the small bookshelf in her living room, where a collection of children's books sat beside novels from Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, and James Baldwin. Her mornings were always busy. She worked at a local preschool, where she spent her days wrangling energetic 4-year-olds, teaching them everything from the alphabet to the importance of kindness. The work was exhausting, but fulfilling. She had a special bond with her students, many of whom came from diverse backgrounds. She believed that by nurturing their young minds, she was playing a small role in shaping a better future. After work, she often stopped by the community center, where she volunteered twice a week to tutor underprivileged kids. Education had always been her passion, and she wanted to give back as much as she could. On other days, she'd take a walk through the local park, listening to music or catching up with her best friend, Deja, over the phone. Evenings were her time to unwind. She'd cook a homemade meal, often something passed down from her mother's recipes, before settling on the couch to read or watch a documentary. It was a peaceful life, one she was grateful for, even if there were moments of loneliness. What Amina didn't know was that one ordinary day, one unexpected moment, would disrupt everything she had come to expect from her world. The city of Charleston was a blend of history and modern charm. Cobblestone streets and colonial-era buildings stood alongside bustling cafes and art galleries, creating a picturesque yet complex environment. Amina had always loved the city's beauty, the way the Spanish moss draped over ancient oak trees, the scent of salt water in the air from the nearby harbor, and the lively sounds of jazz drifting from street performers on King Street. But Charleston wasn't just a place of beauty. It was also a city with deep racial divides. There were areas where she felt at home, like the predominantly black neighborhoods filled with rich culture, where children played outside and neighbors looked out for each other. Then there were places where she knew she'd be met with stares, where she'd feel the unspoken tension of being the only black woman in the room. The park where she often took her evening walks was a reflection of that divide. It was located in an affluent part of town, where young families and retirees strolled past manicured flower beds and pristine walking trails. Amina liked it because it was peaceful, a place where she could clear her mind. But she also knew she stood out there. She noticed the occasional side eye from certain parents, the way some mothers subtly pulled their children closer when she walked by. It didn't bother her as much as it used to. She had long since learned to ignore the small slights, choosing to focus instead on the simple joys of her routine. The laughter of children playing on the swings, the distant sound of a saxophonist performing near the fountain, the way the golden hues of sunset reflected off the water. These were the things that made the park a sanctuary for her. On the day everything changed, the park was just as she remembered it, peaceful, beautiful, alive with activity. Parents watched their children play, joggers moved along the trails, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Then, in a matter of seconds, that peace was shattered. As Amina strolled along her usual path, she heard a sudden, sharp scream pierce the air. The sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. It was a mother's scream, panicked, desperate. She turned quickly, scanning the area. That was when she saw it. Near the edge of the park, a small child, no older than 3, had somehow wandered too close to the lake. The toddler had been playing near the water's edge, unnoticed by the adults nearby, and in a split second, their tiny body tumbled forward into the water. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. Parents gasped, but no one moved fast enough. The water wasn't deep, but for a small child, it was dangerous. The little girl flailed, her tiny arms thrashing in panic. Amina didn't think. She reacted. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward the water, her heart pounding. She heard the cries of the mother behind her, a voice filled with sheer terror. Amina didn't stop to look back. She had one focus, saving the child. She didn't know that her act of heroism would set off a storm of reactions, some of which she never could have anticipated. Amina barely registered the cold shock of the water as she plunged in. The moment she hit the surface, her instincts took over. She kicked forward, reaching for the flailing child, her arms moving swiftly through the rippling waves. The little girl's face was just beneath the surface, her blonde curls floating like seaweed, her tiny arms desperately reaching for something, anything, to hold on to. Amina's heart clenched as she saw the child's terrified blue eyes wide with panic. "I got you." Amina breathed as she reached forward, wrapping her arms securely around the child's tiny frame. The little girl coughed and gasped as Amina lifted her head above the water. The shore wasn't far, but every second felt like an eternity. Amina swam with purpose, ignoring the way her soaked clothes clung to her skin, ignoring the murmur of onlookers gathering at the water's edge. She had one job, to get the child to safety. As soon as she reached the shallows, a pair of strong arms reached down. Amina looked up to see a man, likely the child's father, his face pale, his hands trembling as he scooped the little girl from her arms. The toddler clung to him, coughing but safe. The moment Amina stood, water dripping from her body, she expected gratitude, relief, or even just a breathless thank you. Instead, she was met with something she didn't expect: silence. The mother of the child, a slender white woman with sharp cheekbones and expensive-looking sunglasses perched on her head, stood frozen, her hands gripping her chest. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes locked onto Amina. Amina offered a reassuring smile. "She's okay, just a little shaken up." But the woman didn't respond. She just stared. Amina felt an uneasy knot form in her stomach. The moment should have been one of relief, of shared humanity in the face of crisis. But something was off. The mother's eyes darted from Amina to her daughter, then back to Amina again. Her expression wasn't one of gratitude. It was something else. Something hesitant. Something calculating. Amina had seen this look before. She could almost hear the thoughts running through the woman's head. "She touched my child. She was in the water with her." The woman finally spoke, her voice tight. She was drowning?" Amina nodded, wiping water from her face. "Yes, but she's okay now." The father, still holding the girl, finally found his voice. "Thank you," he said, though his tone was distant, formal. His eyes didn't quite meet hers. Amina shifted uncomfortably. The child clung to her father's chest, still sniffling, still trembling. She had just saved this little girl's life, so why did it feel like she was the one being scrutinized? The mother finally took a step forward, placing her hands on her daughter's wet curls. But even as she touched her, her eyes remained on Amina, suspicion flickering behind them. Amina opened her mouth to say something, to ask if they were okay, to reassure them that everything was fine. But before she could, the woman spoke again. "You were Close by? She asked, her voice careful. Amina blinked. I was walking on the path. I heard her fall in. The mother inhaled sharply, her lips pressing into a thin line. Amina had the sinking feeling that the gratitude she expected was never going to come. The crowd around them had started to thin, the initial panic fading as people returned to their routines. The little girl had stopped crying, though she still clung to her father, her tiny fingers gripping his collar tightly. Amina waited for the mother to say something else. A simple thank you, an acknowledgement, anything. But instead, the woman turned to her husband. Let's go, she said quietly. The father hesitated, as if considering saying more to Amina, but in the end, he simply nodded and walked away, carrying their daughter toward a nearby bench. The mother followed, her posture stiff, her movements quick. Amina stood there for a moment, water still dripping from her clothes, her heart still pounding, not from the rescue, but from what had just happened afterward. She had expected gratitude. Instead, she had received doubt. She shook her head, exhaling sharply as she turned away from the lake. She needed to go home, change, and process everything. But even as she walked away from the scene, the unease lingered in her chest. She knew what she had just experienced. She had seen it before, felt it before, lived it before. It was the kind of reaction that told her, without a single word, that her presence wasn't entirely welcome, even when she had just saved a life. Amina walked home in silence, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her body. She should have felt proud. She had saved a child's life. But instead, the unease in her chest refused to fade. The mother's reaction played on a loop in her mind. The hesitation, the scrutiny, the lack of gratitude. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone buzzed. A message from her best friend, Maya. Hey, are you seeing this? You okay? Amina frowned, typing back. Seeing what? Seconds later, another message popped up, this time with a link. Amina clicked it, and her stomach dropped. A video, shaky, taken from a phone, showed her diving into the lake, swimming to the little girl, and pulling her to safety. But it wasn't the footage that made her breath catch. It was the caption above it. Black woman grabs drowning child. Parents' reaction says it all. The comments were worse. Something seems off about this. Why was she so close? No one else jumped in. I'm just saying, if a white man saved the kid, the parents would have been relieved. But a black woman? They looked suspicious. Wonder why. She saved a life. That's what matters. Y'all love making things about race. Amina's hands clenched around her phone. She had gone from anonymous bystander to an online topic of debate in a matter of hours. And the worst part? The narrative was already out of her control. Amina called Maya immediately. Tell me I'm overreacting. Amina said the moment she picked up. Maya sighed. I wish I could. They think I did something wrong. Amina said, pacing her apartment. Like I don't even know what they're implying. That I was waiting for a kid to fall in the water? She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. This is ridiculous. People don't want to admit what they saw, Maya said. That a black woman saved a white child, and the mom didn't react how she should have. So now, they're twisting it. Amina flopped onto her couch, running a hand through her damp curls. I just wanted to help. Now, I feel like I did something wrong just by being there. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You didn't do anything wrong, Amina. But you know how this works. Amina closed her eyes. She did. The comments. The stares. The mother's silence. It all looped through Amina's mind, over and over, until she wasn't sure what was real anymore. Had she imagined it? Was she reading too much into the situation? Maybe the mother had been in shock. Maybe she hadn't meant to react that way. Or maybe, Amina thought bitterly, she had seen a black woman holding her child and instinctively recoiled. The truth was, Amina had spent her life walking a tightrope, being helpful but never too assertive, being friendly but never too familiar, avoiding situations where her presence could be questioned. And yet, even when she did something unquestionably good, she was still being examined, doubted, debated. She thought back to, when she was a kid, the way her mother had warned her about how the world saw her. You will have to prove yourself twice as much. You will have to be careful with how you move through the world. And even then, it might not be enough. She had never wanted to believe that. She had always hoped people were better than that. But now she wasn't so sure. Amina tried to push the thoughts aside, but the video kept spreading. By the next morning, it was everywhere. News outlets were picking it up. Some praised her bravery, while others dissected the mother's response, turning it into a political debate. Then, the unexpected happened. The mother spoke out. A statement was released to a local news channel. Amina's hands trembled as she read it. "I appreciate the woman who helped my daughter, but I was in shock and confused. I didn't know what had happened or who she was." Any mother would feel the same way. Amina's jaw clenched. Any mother? That was the moment she realized this wasn't just about saving a child. It was about something much bigger, something she couldn't ignore anymore. Amina stared at the statement, rereading it until the words blurred. Any mother would feel the same way. Would they? Would any mother hesitate to embrace the person who had just pulled her child from the brink of death? Would any mother look at her daughter's savior with suspicion instead of gratitude? She wanted to believe the mother had simply been in shock, that she had reacted out of confusion, not bias. But the more she thought about it, the more it gnawed at her. Because if the roles had been reversed, if a white woman had saved a black child, would the reaction have been the same? Her phone buzzed again. Another link. This time, an interview clip. The mother, Rebecca, sat in a stiff-backed chair, her face pale and drawn. The interviewer leaned forward. "Some people believe your reaction was unusual, that you hesitated because of who saved your daughter. What do you say to that?" Rebecca swallowed. I don't know what to say. It all happened so fast." She looked down at her hands. "I guess. I wasn't expecting her to be the one holding my daughter." The interviewer pressed. "What do you mean by that?" Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed. She looked cornered. Amina exhaled sharply. She had her answer. The debate exploded overnight. Some called Rebecca's words an unintentional admission of bias. Others defended her, saying she had merely spoken without thinking. Amina didn't care about the internet's opinion. What mattered was how it made her feel. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't willing to push those feelings down. She called Maya. "I want to talk. Talk. Publicly. I want to say something." Maya was silent for a beat. Then, "You sure? You don't owe anyone an explanation." "I know," Amina said, "but I owe myself the truth." She drafted a statement, careful and deliberate with her words. Then, she recorded a video. "I didn't save that little girl because I wanted attention. I saved her because she needed help. That's what we should be focusing on." But instead, the conversation has become about whether or not her mother's reaction was justified. She paused, staring straight into the camera. If I had looked different, if I had been someone she expected, would she have hesitated at all? The video went viral within hours. Amina braced herself for the backlash, and there was plenty of it. "Stop making this about race. She saved a kid. That's it. Why are we overanalyzing? This is exactly why people don't want to help anymore." But there were also voices rising in support. Her question is valid. We need to sit with it. Black women aren't allowed to just exist in these stories. They're either ignored or suspected. This is why conversations about unconscious bias matter. Even public figures weighed in. Some defended Rebecca. Others called her out. Amina hadn't expected a resolution. She hadn't expected an apology. But then, a direct message appeared in her inbox. From Rebecca. Amina hesitated before opening the message. Rebecca's name sat at the top of her screen, a reminder of the moment that had turned her life upside down. She took a deep breath and clicked. "I owe you an apology." That was the first line. Simple. Direct. Rebecca's message continued. "I've spent the last few days reading, listening, and reflecting. At first, I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say that my reaction had nothing to do with you, that it was just fear and shock. But the truth is, when I saw you holding my daughter, I hesitated. And I can't ignore what that says about me. You didn't deserve that. You saved her, and I should have thanked you immediately. Instead, I let my own biases cloud my judgment. I'm sorry." Amina stared at the screen, her emotions tangled. She had expected backlash. She had expected deflection. But she hadn't expected this. A real acknowledgement. A real apology. For the first time since that day, the tension in her chest eased. Rebecca didn't stop there. A few days later, she posted a video of her own. I want to take accountability for my reaction. I didn't hesitate because Amina did anything wrong. I hesitated because of my own unconscious biases. And that's not okay. She went on to explain how the situation had forced her to confront the prejudices she hadn't realized she carried. She talked about the conversations she had with her friends and family, how uncomfortable it had been to admit that her initial reaction had come from a place of implicit bias. Then, she turned directly to the camera. Amina, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. Thank you for saving my daughter's life. I will never forget what you did. The video took the internet by storm. Some people rolled their eyes. Others called it performative. But many saw it for what it was, a rare moment of genuine self-awareness and growth. And for Amina, that was enough. Sitting on her balcony, Amina let the cool evening air wash over her. This wasn't the outcome she had expected, but maybe it was the one that mattered most. She had spent so much of her life shrinking herself, trying not to make waves. But this time, she had spoken up. And instead of being dismissed, she had been heard. It wasn't just about one mother's reaction. It was about all the moments like this, seen and unseen, where Black women were met with hesitation instead of gratitude. Maybe this moment wouldn't change the world, but it had changed something. A few days later, Amina received another message. This time it was a photo, a little girl holding a handmade sign. Tears pricked at her eyes. She typed a response. Tell her she's welcome, and tell her to be brave, always. As she hit send, Amina smiled. Maybe she hadn't just saved a life that day. Maybe she had started something bigger. This story isn't just about one moment. It's about the conversations we need to have. Unconscious bias exists, and it takes real courage to acknowledge it. Amina saved a life that day, but she also sparked a dialogue that mattered. What would you do in her situation? Have you ever witnessed a moment like this? Let's talk about it in the comments. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change.